Intolerance of uncertainty is one of the most important factors that tends to perpetuate and fuel excessive worry and anxiety. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all of the different ways in which intolerance of uncertainty can weave its way into your life and what you can do to stop it. Hi everyone! This is the ultimate guide to understanding intolerance of uncertainty and how intolerance of uncertainty fuels worry and anxiety. This is going to be a compilation video, combining a series of videos I did a while back, focusing on 12 different manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty. And what we're going to be talking about is how to recognize the various manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty and what you can do to become more tolerant of uncertainty. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I'm a registered psychologist with the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute or replacement for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. Now, with those things out of the way, let's start talking about intolerance of uncertainty. Now, you can think of intolerance of uncertainty kind of like a psychological allergy. That for some people, they are more sensitive or more intolerant of uncertainty. And if you think about how an allergy works, suppose I'm allergic to dust. All it takes is for there to be just a little bit of dust in a room. And I walk into that room, I'm going to get sneezy, watery eyes, that type of thing. Whereas someone else who's not allergic to dust walks into the same room and they have no reaction at all. The reason I'm having that reaction is because I have this allergy to dust. The reason the other person isn't having a reaction is because they're not allergic to dust. It's the same with intolerance of uncertainty. Different people have different levels of tolerance for uncertainty. And so if someone is intolerant of uncertainty, all it takes is for there to be just a little bit of uncertainty in a situation, and it's going to cause a big emotional reaction on their part. Whereas someone else is in the exact same situation and they don't really react very much at all because they're more tolerant of uncertainty. So you can think of tolerating uncertainty as kind of like falling on a continuum, where there's people who are highly tolerant of uncertainty, and there are people who are highly intolerant of uncertainty. So people who are highly tolerant of uncertainty, these are the type of people who can travel to Europe with a one-way ticket and a quarter in their pocket. And they see it as a great adventure. They have no idea where they're going. They have no idea where they're going to stay. They have no idea how they're going to get around, what they're going to do for money, how long they're going to be gone for. It doesn't matter. It's going to be a great adventure. And they just see it as such. Those people are highly tolerant of uncertainty. People who are highly intolerant of uncertainty, if they're going to Europe, they have a clearly laid out itinerary. They know exactly what they're going to do on what days. They have all of their excursions planned and booked and paid for ahead of time. They have backup plans just in case the weather is going to change. Those people are highly intolerant of uncertainty. You see, the way intolerance of uncertainty works is that it's kind of like a lens through which you view the world. And you can think of this lens as you filter uncertainty through the lens. And so when I'm faced with an uncertain situation, if I'm intolerant of uncertainty, what this intolerance of uncertainty lens is going to do is it's going to bend my prediction of what's going to happen to be a negative outcome. And so when faced with uncertainty, because of this intolerance of uncertainty lens, I become really, really good at seeing all of the negative things that could potentially happen, all of the negative consequences, all of the negative events that can occur. But you can probably also recognize at a logical level that not all uncertain situations turn out negatively. Some turn out neutral, some may even turn out positive. But the intolerance of uncertainty lens prevents me from really considering the positive or neutral potential outcomes. And all I really ever focus on is the negative outcomes, or the negative potential outcomes. And so it's not so much the uncertainty that I'm responding to if I'm intolerant of uncertainty. It's what I feel that the uncertainty represents. And it's that negative outcome. So the thing is, for people who are intolerant of uncertainty, they're faced with a dilemma. On one hand, there's inherent uncertainty in the world. On the other hand, I'm intolerant of uncertainty. And so they have to find some way of reconciling these two things. And what can often happen is that people who are intolerant of uncertainty will work really hard to try and eliminate uncertainty in their world. But they're inherently unsuccessful because it's impossible to eliminate uncertainty. It's kind of like trying to fill a bucket with water, but the bucket's got a big hole in the bottom. So no matter how much you're trying to eliminate uncertainty in the world, you're pouring water into this bucket, it's never filling up the bucket. So the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty, but the goal is more to focus on building tolerance for uncertainty and to become more okay with uncertainty in the world. And so this raises a question. How do you do this? How do you become more tolerant of uncertainty? And the first step is to recognize the various ways in which intolerance of uncertainty has weaved its way into your life. And once you recognize these various manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty, the key is to start behaving differently towards uncertainty. And that's what this video is going to be discussing. I'm going to be talking about 12 different ways in which intolerance of uncertainty may have weaved its way into your life, and some specific things that you can do for each of these manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty to help you become more tolerant for uncertainty. So with that quick background, let's start talking about the first manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty, which is avoiding doing certain things that you're uncertain about. Now, I want you to imagine that you and your best friend had a big fight a few days ago, and you feel really bad about what happened. However, you find yourself constantly worrying about how upset or angry your friend might be about some of the things that you said during the argument. You might start to generate a lot of what-if questions, like, what if my friend never forgives me? What if my friend hates me now? What if my friend is going to tell other people what an awful person, an awful friend that I am? What might you be tempted to do in this situation? Well, if you're a person who worries a lot, you might find yourself avoiding dealing with the situation entirely. You don't reach out to your friend to apologize. You don't send them a text message to check in and see how they're doing or to see if they want to talk. It's tempting to want to avoid the situation entirely, because the danger is, if I reach out to my friend to talk about the argument, it might lead to another argument. Or my friend might tell me that they don't want to talk to me ever again. My friend might not answer my call, and that would just confirm how upset and angry they are with me. This is an example of how avoidance is a manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. And I've done a number of videos on the concept of intolerance of uncertainty and how intolerance of uncertainty tends to drive excessive and difficult to control worry. Essentially, intolerance of uncertainty causes a person to focus on all of the potential negative outcomes in a situation, and therefore makes the person feel much more anxious and worried about what might happen. Avoidance is a very common manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. By avoiding things that we're worrying about, what that does is it creates a temporary state of certainty, a state of certainty in this moment. So, in the example of the argument with my friend, by avoiding reaching out to my friend, I have a temporary state of certainty that they're not yelling at me, that they're not telling me I'm a horrible friend, and that they're not telling me that they don't want to have anything to do with me ever again. None of those things are happening right now because I'm avoiding interacting with my friend. Because I don't know how my friend feels or what they're thinking about me after our fight, the intolerance of uncertainty gets me to think about all of the potential negative thoughts that my friend has about me and all of the negative outcomes that might result from our fight. And I don't want any of those negative things to happen. And so I avoid putting myself in any situation where those things might happen. So this is how avoidance is a manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. We avoid things that we're not sure about and that we worry will lead to bad outcomes. And in doing so, we create a temporary state of perceived safety. So you might be wondering, what's the harm in this? If avoidance makes me feel better, and I feel less anxious if I avoid doing certain things, so what? What's the problem with that? Now, I don't think you have to think very hard to recognize some of the potential problems with avoidance as a way of coping with uncertainty in life. If we avoid everything that we're uncertain about because we worry that the uncertainty is going to turn out negatively, then our life becomes much smaller. We avoid trying new things. We avoid taking risks in life. We avoid learning something new. We avoid talking to new people. We avoid traveling anywhere outside of where we feel comfortable and what we know. So our world becomes very tiny and very restricted, very mundane, very boring, and very predictable. For someone who engages in a lot of avoidance of things that they're uncertain about or that are new, it's almost like they're trading in experiencing new and potentially enjoyable life experiences for the safety and security of what's known. However, this is all based on an assumption that if I'm not certain about something, then it's going to turn out badly. If I try anything new, it's going to turn out terrible. Now, you probably know that at a logical level, that's not the case. But as typically is the case with intolerance of uncertainty, it's not a matter of logically knowing that uncertainty doesn't always turn out badly. It's more a problem of a person not behaving as if it's true. So if you find yourself avoiding doing certain things, how do you know if that avoidance is due to intolerance of uncertainty or if that avoidance is due to simply not wanting to do the behavior? For example, if I find myself avoiding going grocery shopping because I hate grocery shopping and I'd rather just order in food, that's not an example of intolerance of uncertainty. In that example, the avoidance is more me being lazy and disinterested in grocery shopping. However, if I find myself avoiding going grocery shopping because I'm worried that I'm going to forget to buy something, or that I'm going to spend too much money, or that I'm going to run into someone at the grocery store and have a weird or awkward interaction, that's more indicative of intolerance of uncertainty avoidance. So the key to determining whether the avoidance is intolerance of uncertainty or something else relates to the motivation behind the avoidance. If I'm avoiding because I'm not sure how the situation is going to turn out, and I'm concerned that something bad is going to happen, that's a pretty good sign that I'm being intolerant of uncertainty. Okay, so you find yourself avoiding something and you recognize that it's you being intolerant of uncertainty. What do you do about this? How can you fix this? Well, the first step you've already done, which is recognizing that you're avoiding something and that the avoidance behavior is intolerance of uncertainty. The next step is to think about a behavioral experiment that you can do in the situation that involves you not avoiding what you're afraid of. Now, this doesn't have to be a huge step, but it can be a small shift in behavior in which you plan to engage in an approach behavior rather than avoidance. So you can think about these behavioral experiments as tests of your worry prediction. Let's use the example of me getting into the argument with my friend and talk about an example of a behavioral experiment. What I might decide to do is to send my friend a text message, checking in with them, apologizing for some of the things that I said, and seeing if they're open to talking about it. That's the behavioral experiment. That's what I'm going to do differently. The next step is to think about what I worry is going to happen in that situation. This is essentially my prediction of what will happen when I send my friend the text message. Now, it's important to think about your worries as predictions because that's all they really are. Worries are always just predictions. So, what might my worry predictions be in this situation? Well, I might think that my friend isn't going to respond to my text message, or that my friend is going to tell me to get lost and that they never want to talk to me again. My friend may block me from contacting them. Those are my predictions as to what's going to happen when I text my friend. So we have the experiment, what I'm going to do, and we have my prediction, what my worry tells me is going to happen. So the next step is to actually do the behavior and see what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. And this is often where people who worry a lot get surprised by how excessive and unreasonable their worries are. Often when people engage in these behavioral experiments, not avoiding things that they're afraid of, they're surprised that it doesn't turn out nearly as badly as they anticipated. So by collecting the data, you have evidence which you can now compare to what your worry prediction actually was. And that's the last step, comparing what actually happened to what you predicted was going to happen. And this gives you a sense of how accurate your worries are at predicting what's going to happen. If you find over and over and over and over again that what you predict was going to happen doesn't happen, then it probably tells you that your worries are pretty terrible predictors of the future. And what this can do is to get you to start questioning how necessary it is to avoid uncertain situations or avoid things that you're not sure about. And therefore, it allows you to start expanding your world and trying new things because you have experience with your worry not being an accurate predictor of what actually happens. So, behavioral experiments around doing exposure to things that you're avoiding can be very powerful to help you overcome intolerance of uncertainty. Now, the other thing you can do is to take advantage of all of the naturally occurring opportunities to to tolerate uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. For example, if you find yourself avoiding ordering something new at a restaurant or avoiding trying a different restaurant because you're not sure if you're going to like it, a tolerating uncertainty way of approaching that is to recognize that you always order the same thing and you always go to the same restaurant. And so maybe what you do is you order something different and see what happens. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but you just allow yourself to try it out and see what happens. I always encourage my clients to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? This question can be a major avoidance buster. If you find yourself avoiding doing something, avoiding returning a phone call, avoiding sending that email, avoiding taking that new exercise class, ask yourself, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? Well, you'd probably make that phone call. You'd probably send that email. You'd probably sign up for that exercise class. And in doing so, you build your tolerance for uncertainty because you're no longer avoiding all of the things that you're uncertain about in your life. And this can result in you feeling a lot freer, more spontaneous, and less anxious because you see that the world isn't as scary or as dangerous as your worry would get you to believe. Now, to a large extent, we all like to have control in our lives, feeling like we generally know what we're doing and that we know how to do certain tasks the proper way. But for people who tend to worry a lot, this sense of being in control of everything is a powerful driving force that can perpetuate their worry. I want you to imagine a scenario in which you're at work and you have a large and very important project that you're working on. The project is one of the most important tasks you've ever been assigned since you started working, and you really want it to go well because this could potentially supercharge your career. So it's a big deal, and you want to make sure that everything goes right. What might you be tempted to do in this situation? Well, if I'm someone who worries a lot, this would likely be a very anxiety-provoking and sort of highly anxiety-provoking situation, and I would want control over all aspects of the project to ensure that everything was done properly. What this means is that I'm going to want to do it all, and that it would be extremely difficult for me to delegate any of the tasks to anyone else. Even if I have the best team or the best assistant, I might be reluctant to pass on any part of this project to them because I know that everything needs to be done right. The thing is, delegating tasks to other people is fraught with uncertainty. By doing everything yourself, you know that everything has been done the way that you think it should be done. Everything has been done the right way. The moment you have to involve someone else, it creates a lot of uncertainty in the situation. What if the person doesn't do the task properly? What if they mess up the task and I have to end up working on it to fix what they did wrong, which just takes up more time? What if I delegate them a task and they don't even do it? You know what? It's just easier if I do it all myself. Now, have you ever found yourself saying that? Have you ever found yourself in a scenario where you've said, it's just easier and better if I do it all myself? If so, this may be a manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty in your life. Feeling the need to be in control of situations is a very common form of intolerance of uncertainty. By having control, we have a sense that we can control the outcome and that we can make the outcome be what we want it to be. The moment we relinquish control and involve other people or have to rely on other people to do things in order for there to be success, this can trigger a lot of anxiety and worry because other people are inherently uncertain. Even the most reliable people can sometimes surprise us with their unreliability. Even the most conscientious people can sometimes make mistakes. Even the most diligent people can sometimes get sick and not be able to do their work. So by not delegating tasks to other people and doing everything yourself, it eliminates some of the uncertainty that's involved with having to rely on other people. So if that's the case, what's the harm in this? If it's just easier for me to do everything myself so that I don't have to rely on other people, what's so wrong about that? Well, the thing is, if you had unlimited time and unlimited resources, maybe there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. If you could do everything yourself and had the ability to do everything yourself, then that would be okay, I guess. However, we don't have unlimited energy. We don't have unlimited time or resources. We can't do everything. And so sometimes we do have to delegate tasks to other people. Additionally, by having to do everything yourself, this can often take the form of needing to have extreme control over situations, which can lead to problems with other people. For example, if I don't let my wife do any of the household cleaning or chores because I'm concerned that she won't do it the right way or she won't do it well enough, this can lead to my wife feeling disrespected or underappreciated. Additionally, I may start to grow resentful because I feel like I have to be doing everything around the house because no one else will do it to the same standard that I would. This is also an exhausting way of functioning. It's often not sustainable to have to do everything yourself, be it in your personal life or your work life. You may be able to get away with it for short bursts of time, but eventually the enormity of doing all the tasks can overwhelm you. So while it can be tempting to want to do everything yourself and not delegate tasks to anyone else, it's unrealistic, it's unsustainable, and it's exhausting. It's also based on the assumption that if I'm not in control, and that if I don't do everything, then it's not going to be done properly, and something bad is going to happen. Now, at a logical level, you probably know that this is simply not true. But as is typically the case with intolerance of uncertainty, it's not just a matter of logically knowing that uncertainty doesn't always turn out badly. It's more a problem of a person not behaving as if that's true. So, if you find yourself doing everything yourself and not delegating tasks to anyone else, what can you do about this? How can you fix this? Well, the first step is to recognize that you're engaging in intolerance of uncertainty behavior, recognizing that you have difficulty delegating tasks to other people, and that the reason for this is because you're anxious about the uncertainty that comes when you have to rely on and trust that other people will do what they're supposed to do. And after that, the idea is to think about behavioral experiments that you can do in the situation that involves delegating tasks to other people and letting go of some of the control. Now, this doesn't have to be a huge, grand gesture, but it can be a small shift in behavior in which you delegate smaller tasks to other people and see what happens. You can think about these behavioral experiments as ways of testing and evaluating the accuracy of your worry. So, for example, if I always load the dishwasher because I don't think that my wife will load it as efficiently, my behavior experiment could be to ask her to load the dishwasher. That's the experiment. The next step is to think about what I worry is going to happen in that situation. This is my prediction of what will happen when I ask my wife to load the dishwasher. And it's really important to begin to think about your worries in this way, to think about your worries as predictions, because that's all they really are. So, what might my worry prediction be in this situation? Well, I might worry that, what if my wife doesn't load the dishwasher and that the dishes just sit there overnight? I might worry, what if my wife doesn't load the dishwasher as efficiently and that there will be a whole bunch of dishes that need to be hand washed because they wouldn't fit into the dishwasher? I might worry that my wife may have loaded the dishwasher in a way that not all of the dishes get cleaned properly. So, those are my predictions of what's going to happen when I ask my wife to load the dishwasher. So we have our experiment, what I'm going to do, and we have our prediction. What is it that my worry tells me is going to happen? The next step is to then actually engage in the behavior, to ask my wife to load the dishwasher and see what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. By seeing what happens and collecting the data, you then have evidence which you can now compare to the worry prediction and to see how does the evidence actually compare to what your worry told you was going to happen. And that's the final step, comparing what you predicted was going to happen with what actually happened. What this does is it gives you a sense of how accurate your worries are at predicting what's going to happen in the future. And if you find over and over and over and over again that what you predict was going to happen doesn't happen, then what this suggests is that your worries are pretty terrible at predicting the future. And what this can do is to get you to start questioning how necessary it is for you to have control over everything, and how important it is for you to avoid delegating tasks to anyone else. And as a result of all of this, you may be more willing to delegate tasks to other people, to let others take on roles, and then that frees you up to do other things or to be more efficient in your activities because you're not having to do everything yourself. So these behavioral experiments around delegating tasks to other people can be very useful and powerful in overcoming intolerance of uncertainty. And the other thing that you can do is to try to take advantage of all of the naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. And one of the ways you can do this is by imagining the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of your brain. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? By having this question at the forefront of your mind, you're likely going to be better at recognizing and you're likely going to be better at recognizing and identifying times that you're needing to be overly in control of a situation. And it will remind you to look for opportunities to delegate tasks or to pass on tasks to other people. And by doing this, you're constantly building tolerance for uncertainty, which can lead you to, ironically, feeling more in control, feeling more confident, being more efficient, and feeling less anxious because you see that the world is not as frightening or dangerous as your worry would lead you to believe, and that you learn that you can rely on other people to help you when you need help. I want you to imagine a scenario in which I'm a 24-year-old. I'm a 24-year-old living in my parents' home. And although I get along well with my parents and feel comfortable there, there's also a part of me that thinks maybe I should be out on my own, get my own place, and be more independent in my life. However, just the thought of that makes me extremely anxious and worried, and I start to think about all of the what if questions. Like, what if I'm not able to afford rent? What if I have to get a roommate and I end up with a really terrible roommate? What if I get lonely? What if I can't stay on top of all of my bills? What if I don't do all of the household chores and I end up living in a total mess? Now, these are all very common and reasonable concerns for a young person who's never lived on their own. But rather than acknowledging that it's my anxiety and my worry that's preventing me from moving out, what can sometimes happen, even at a subconscious level, is that I start to generate all sorts of imaginary obstacles or reasons why it doesn't make sense for me to move out. There's nothing affordable in my area. My parents need me to stay at home to help them out and to look after them. My younger siblings are such brats, and so I need to be at home to balance out how much they annoy my parents. It makes more financial sense for me to save money for further education or a down payment on a house. Now, those may all be potential reasons or factors that might prevent me from moving out. But are they the actual reasons? Are all of these things true, or are they just ways of me rationalizing not wanting to do something that makes me really anxious, uncomfortable, and worried? Specifically, moving out on my own and being away from the safety of my home. This is an example of finding imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things, and how this is a form of intolerance of uncertainty. Finding imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things is a very common manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty, in large part because it's a face-saving form of avoidance. I'm not avoiding moving out of my parents' home because I'm afraid. I'm avoiding moving out of my parents' home for all of these really good reasons. But if I'm being honest with myself, the real reason I'm avoiding moving out is because I don't know what it's going to be like on my own. And that uncertainty makes me really scared, anxious, and worried. And so coming up with these imaginary obstacles allows me to avoid moving out and potentially ending up in a really difficult or negative living situation. In doing so, I maintain a sense of certainty because I get to stay at home, and that's something that I know, I'm comfortable with, and it's not anxiety provoking for me to be there. It's certainly less scary than living on my own, having to pay all my bills, having to be responsible for my entire space. So you might ask, what's the harm in this? If these imaginary obstacles or reasons not to move out make me feel better and less anxious, what's so bad about that? Well, I think the answer is pretty self-explanatory. By not challenging myself to do things that I've never done before, it limits my growth. It limits my development as a person, and I end up being stagnant and frozen in life. In the example, I end up being unhappy living at home, feeling embarrassed because all of my other friends are independent and on their own, But here I am, stuck at home living in my parents' basement because I'm afraid of what it would be like to live on my own. The key thing to recognize is that these imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things are all based on the assumption that if I try something new or something I'm uncertain about, then it's going to turn out badly, and that's going to be awful. But you can probably also recognize that this isn't always the case. Logically, we know that uncertain situations don't always lead to negative outcomes. But as is typically the case with intolerance of uncertainty, it's not a matter of logically knowing that uncertainty doesn't always turn out badly. It's more a problem of not behaving as if that's true. So, how do you know? How do you know if you're actually engaging in this form of intolerance of uncertainty? How do you know if you're coming up with imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things versus these not being imaginary obstacles, and that the reasons that I'm coming up with are perfectly valid and true? Well, a big part of this is being open and honest with yourself, as you're the only one who knows your real motivation. In the scenario where I enjoy living at home, I'm able to help out my parents, I'm saving lots of money, and everyone's happy with the arrangement, then me not wanting to leave home isn't intolerance of uncertainty. It's a positive situation that I feel perfectly happy with. However, in the scenario where I feel embarrassed for still living at home, that I'm not happy there, that my parents aren't happy to have me there, and they keep trying to encourage me to move out, then chances are my obstacles and reasons for staying at home probably aren't valid. And it's probably a good sign that this is me being intolerant of uncertainty. So, okay, you recognize that you're coming up with imaginary obstacles and reasons not to do something that you're anxious about, and you recognize that this is an example of you being intolerant of uncertainty. What can you do about this? How do you fix the situation? Well, the first step is a big one, and that's recognizing that you are coming up with imaginary obstacles and reasons not to do certain things, and that this is a form of avoidance due to my intolerance of uncertainty. Being aware of that and recognizing that is a big first step. Now, the next step is to think about a behavioral experiment that you can do in the situation that involves you tackling some of these imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do something. This doesn't have to be a massive goal, but more a small shift in behavior that challenges some of these imagined obstacles and reasons. One way of thinking about these behavioral experiments is to view them as a test of the accuracy of your worry. So in the scenario I've discussed, what I might do as a behavioral experiment is to start looking online for various places that I might be able to rent in my area. I may have never done that before, and so that's the behavioral experiment. That's what I'm going to do differently in the situation. The next step is to think about what I worry is going to happen in the situation. This is my prediction of what will happen if I start looking at ads for places that I can rent. Remember, it's important to think about your worries as predictions because that's all they really are. So, what might be some of my worry predictions in this situation? Well, I might worry that I won't be able to find a rental unit that I can afford. I worry that all the rental places that I could afford involve me living with a roommate who might end up being creepy or weird. I worry that I might realize that it will never be an option for me to ever live away from home. So we have the experiment, what I'm going to do, and we have my predictions, what my worry predicts is going to happen. The next step is to actually engage in the behavior and see what happens. I start looking at wanted ads to see what I can find. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. By collecting the data, you generate evidence which you can now compare to what your worry prediction told you would happen. And that's the last step, comparing what actually happened to what you predicted was going to happen. And what this does is it gives you a sense of how accurate your worries are at predicting what's going to occur in the future. I might find that there's lots of places that I can afford that seem like really great options for me to move into. I might find that people who are looking for a roommate seem really nice, and it may actually be a positive thing for me to live with someone else rather than starting out entirely on my own. In doing these behavioral experiments, if you find over and over again that what you predicted was going to happen doesn't actually happen, then it probably suggests that your worries are pretty terrible predictors of the future. And in doing this, you can begin to start questioning how necessary it is to generate these imagined obstacles or rationalized explanations for not doing certain things. And this can lead you to expanding your world and trying new things because you have experience with your worry not being an accurate predictor of what actually happens. So these behavioral experiments around overcoming these imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things, these behavioral experiments can be powerful in helping you overcome intolerance of uncertainty. The other thing that I often encourage my clients to do as a more general way of building tolerance for uncertainty is to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? By keeping this question at the forefront of your mind, it allows you to start questioning and challenging the motivations behind potential avoidance behavior. Did I decline the invitation by my friend to go to the gym because I don't like gym culture and think that gym culture is toxic? Or did I decline the invitation because I'm worried that I won't know how to use the exercise machines and that I'm going to do something to really embarrass myself? By having this question at the forefront of my mind, it causes me to reflect on and think about what might be motivating my behavior, and thereby potentially challenging these imaginary obstacles or reasons that I come up with for not wanting to do certain things. And by doing this, you build tolerance for uncertainty, and this can lead to you feeling a lot freer, less constricted, and less anxious, because you see that the world is not as scary, frightening, or dangerous as your worry would lead you to believe. Now, one of the most tragic and challenging ways in which intolerance of uncertainty can manifest itself is in a person having difficulty committing themselves to the things that they really want in life. I'll often see this in students who don't really work hard or commit to their schoolwork because they're afraid that if they really try and fail, they'll be really disappointed, and it will confirm to them that they're not capable. I'll see this in people who limit themselves in their career, not pushing themselves to advance or try and expand what they're doing because they're concerned that they're not smart enough or talented enough to do that, and so they don't bother applying for positions or roles that they could be really good at. I see this in people who struggle to commit to a relationship with a partner who may be very caring and loving, but the person isn't certain that this is the absolute right relationship for them. And so they hold back emotionally from the relationship and never fully allow themselves to become invested in it. The common thread behind all of these scenarios is that there's potential for something really good to happen if the person commits and fully invests themselves in their schoolwork, their career, or that relationship. However, all of these scenarios also have the potential for being extremely disappointing, or for there to be a massive emotional letdown if they don't turn out the way the person hopes for. So for example, what if a student commits to working really hard in a course and does their best, but only gets a C in the course? What does that say about the student? Well, what it might say is that the student isn't capable of anything more than a C. No matter how hard they try, no matter how hard they work, it's just confirmation that they're not good enough to excel. What if a person fully commits to their job, doing extra work, taking on extra responsibilities, doing continuing education courses, applying for promotions, but they don't succeed and don't get ahead in their job? What does that say about their career prospects? It might imply that no matter how hard that person works, they're going to be limited in terms of how successful they will be in their career, and that their current level is about as good as it's going to get. What if I fully invest myself in a romantic relationship, opening myself up, sharing personal things, telling the other person that I love them, but the other person ends the relationship? What does that say about how lovable I am? I'll be devastated by the end of the relationship, and I'll feel that I wasn't good enough for the other person, and that's why they ended the relationship. The way intolerance of uncertainty works in these situations is that by only partially committing myself to my schoolwork, advancing my career, a relationship, it's almost like I'm hedging my bets against failure in the situation not working out the way I want it to. If I don't put much effort into my schoolwork and I don't do very well, I always have the explanation that I didn't really work that hard at it, and that's why I didn't get a good mark. If I don't put much effort into my work and just do the bare minimum, then that explains why I'm not advancing in my career. It's not that I'm not good enough, but it's just that I don't really care too much about the job. If I don't fully open myself up and make myself vulnerable in this romantic relationship, if the relationship ends, it was because we didn't really connect, or it's okay because I wasn't fully invested in the other person. It's almost like I'm building in an excuse for why the situation isn't going to work out, even before it hasn't worked out. And this is the real tragedy of this manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. By only partially committing yourself to something, it's almost like you're guaranteeing that you're not going to succeed at it. And the certainty of knowing that you're not going to succeed at it is almost better than the potential threat or loss of really trying, hoping for success, but then experiencing failure. This manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is based on the assumption that the things I care about, things that are meaningful to me, are never going to work out. Now, at a logical level, you probably know that this simply isn't true. But as is typically the case with intolerance of uncertainty, it's not a matter of just logically knowing that uncertainty doesn't turn out badly. It's more a problem of a person behaving as if that's not true. So if you find yourself only partially committing to a relationship, a job, schoolwork, or anything else meaningful in your life, what can you do about this? How can you change this? Well, the first thing is to recognize that you are only partially committing yourself, to recognize the various ways in which you're holding yourself back from fully investing in this thing that you care about. And once you recognize that you're doing that, it's important to remind yourself as to where that's going to get you. Essentially, remind yourself that you're guaranteeing that you're not going to get the things out of life that you want. And so you have certainty about that. While the certainty may be a good thing, that you feel more comfortable with the certainty, the fact that you're not getting what you want out of life, that's not a good thing. So with that in mind, the idea is to think about what are some of the ways in which you can more fully commit yourself in your schoolwork, at your job, in the relationship, and to try to do some of those things. It might mean you do a behavioral experiment where you take one assignment in your course and really invest in doing a good job at it. You work as hard as you can at it. You give it your all, put in all of the effort. And as you're doing this, you want to be aware of what it is that you're worried is going to happen if you give your all and commit. Maybe you recognize that you worry that you're going to fail anyway, and that this will just confirm that you're not as smart as you think you are. Okay, that's your prediction. That's what the worry is telling you is going to happen. So we have the experiment and we have the prediction of what we think is going to happen. The next step is to actually engage in the behavior. Give my all in this assignment and then see what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. By seeing what happens in collecting the data, you then have evidence which you can now compare to the worry prediction. And that's the final step. Comparing what you predicted was going to happen, what the worry told you was going to happen, with what actually happened. So if I give my all on the assignment, if I do my best and I get an A, what does that tell me? Well, my worry predicted that I was going to fail and I don't really know this stuff and it was going to be a mess. But that wasn't true. So in this case, the worry prediction was just plain wrong. And if you find over and over and over again that what you predict to happen doesn't actually happen, what that tells you is that your worries aren't very good at predicting the future. And what this can do is to get you to start questioning some of your assumptions about yourself and how necessary it is for you to hold back and only partially commit yourself to these things that you want in your life. By allowing yourself to invest more in the goals and the things that you want, you might find that things actually turn out the way you want them to, and that you're able to succeed in places that you might have previously thought you would have failed. So these behavioral experiments around committing more to things that you want in your life can be very useful and powerful in overcoming intolerance of uncertainty. The other thing you can do is to take advantage of all of the naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. I'll often encourage my clients to do this by imagining the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? Having this question at the forefront of your mind, you're likely going to be able to better recognize and identify times that you're only partially committing yourself to something out of the fear that you might fail at it. And when you recognize that you're only partially committing yourself, it gives you an opportunity to think about what you can do in the moment to more fully commit yourself, to more fully invest yourself. This could be something as simple as giving your partner a spontaneous hug, even though you're not sure how they would respond to that. It could be sharing something personal about yourself with your partner so that you feel more connected or more engaged with them. By doing these sorts of things, you're pushing yourself to more fully invest and commit and try for the things that you want in your life. Now, it doesn't mean that everything is going to work out the way you want it to, but at least you give yourself the opportunity or the chance for positive things to happen. Now, you've probably heard of the expression FOMO, or fear of missing out. It's the idea that you don't want to miss out on any incredible or awesome opportunities or events in life. And so I want to try and do as much as I can to make sure that I don't have any regrets. But have you thought about how this might relate to worry and anxiety? Well, trying to do too much, spreading yourself out really thinly, this fear of missing out, these are all examples of intolerance of uncertainty. So, how exactly does spreading yourself out too thin or trying to do too many things at once, how exactly does this relate to intolerance of uncertainty? Well, the idea is that I don't want to miss out on any opportunities that life might present. So what I try to do is to keep all of my options open as long as possible, just in case something really incredible comes up. And if it does, I'll have the opportunity to take advantage of it. And as a result, what ends up happening is I have my hands in all sorts of pots all at the same time, trying to make sure that I'm keeping all of the potential doors of opportunity open, just in case something wonderful presents itself. If I'm a student in school, I might take as many general studies courses as long as I can so that I have the opportunity to transfer into as many future programs as possible. If I'm at work, I'll say yes to working on as many different projects as I can, just in case one of those projects is a real success. I want to make sure that I'm available to be a part of that as well. So what ends up happening is that I don't want to say no to any opportunities. And so I say yes to as many opportunities as possible. After all, isn't keeping my options open a good thing? Well, the answer to that question is no, not really. Keeping all of your available options open as long as possible would work fine if you had unlimited resources, unlimited time, and unlimited energy. But we don't have unlimited resources, time, or energy. What we can do is finite. At some point, we have to say no to some opportunities, and what that means is we run the risk of missing out on really great opportunities that could have been. This is where intolerance of uncertainty comes in. The intolerance of uncertainty will tell me that if I say no to this potential opportunity, then it's going to be a tremendous lost opportunity that I will regret for the rest of my life. And that's a bit of a scary thought, which makes it really tempting to want to keep those opportunities and options open as long as you can. But you can probably also see the problem with this, in that if you have to keep all of your options open for everything, you're not going to be able to commit to anything. And so you only ever get partially invested in anything that you do. You end up becoming a generalist, knowing a little bit about a lot of stuff, but not really knowing a lot about anything in particular. It's also important to recognize that this fear of missing out, spreading myself too thin, trying to do too many things at once, it's all based on the assumption that I'm going to say no to something, and that is going to be the one thing that I should have never said no to. Now, you can probably already recognize that at a logical level, this may not be the case. Sometimes saying no to something can be really good because it frees you up to spend more time focusing on other things that are more relevant to what you want in your life. The problem is, you can never know with certainty what to say no to, and this is where intolerance of uncertainty grabs a hold of you. But the question comes up, how do I know if I'm spreading myself too thin because of intolerance of uncertainty versus spreading myself too thin because I just have too much going on in my life? Now, the key to answering this question is to think about what is the motivation for you to spread yourself so thin. If, for example, you find yourself doing too many things at once, spreading yourself too thin because you're overworked, you have too many responsibilities going on in your life, between balancing work, taking care of the home, raising kids, etc., etc. This isn't necessarily an example of intolerance of uncertainty. In this example, you're not spreading yourself too thin because you're fearful of missing out on anything or fearful of saying no and then regretting it. You're being spread too thin because you have far too much on your plate. But imagine a scenario in which I'm a student at university taking a full course load plus additional courses that might be prerequisites for different programs I've thought about. While at the same time, I'm playing on the basketball team in case there's an opportunity to get an athletic scholarship, while at the same time being on the boards of different clubs at the university to try and increase my social connections regarding possible career opportunities after I graduate. In this example, part of what I'm doing with all of these extra things that I'm taking on is trying to eliminate uncertainty about potential lost opportunities. But all I'm really doing is just piling thing upon thing upon thing. And it's not sustainable and it's not realistic. So, what can you do if you find that you're spreading yourself too thin, trying to do too many things at once due to fear of potentially missing out on something? What can you do to change this? Well, the first step is to recognize what you're doing and to recognize that you're not overworked because you have too many things going on, but that you're overworked because you're choosing to take on so much responsibility, so many other things, because you don't want to miss out on anything. And once you recognize that it's this fear of missing out that's driving this spreading yourself too thin, the idea is to engage in some behavioral experiments in which you say no to some potential opportunities. Now, the thing is, you may never know if you said no to an opportunity that may have turned out to be something incredible. But a big part of this is tolerating the uncertainty of that and focusing your efforts on fewer things that you can more deeply commit to or invest in. You can also do this by taking advantage of naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. One of the things I often encourage my clients to do is to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? Having this question at the forefront of your mind gives you an opportunity to think about some of the decisions that you're making and what's motivating those decisions. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I say yes to volunteer on that additional project at work, or would I decline because I just have too many things going on right now? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I stay in a general stream of study as long as I can, or would I commit to trying to get into this one program that really interests me. By thinking this way, and by sometimes saying no to taking on additional tasks, even though they may come with potential opportunities, what you're doing is you're tolerating uncertainty and you're not living your life constantly trying to avoid a fear of missing out and thereby never actually committing to something and always feeling like you're worn out because you're spread so thin. Now, we all tend to procrastinate at times. Procrastination, it's a pretty common human experience. But I want you to imagine the following scenario. Suppose you're at work and you have to return a phone call to a really important client. You have some bad news to tell the client, but you also want to explain your plan for how you're going to address the situation with the client. But you find yourself getting quite anxious and nervous about making the phone call because you're not certain about how your client is going to react to the bad news, or that maybe you're not certain you're going to be able to express everything exactly the way you want to say it. So as you get more and more anxious as you think about making this phone call, you might find yourself putting it off, telling yourself that you'll deal with it later. Notice, what's driving the anxiety in the situation is the uncertainty of how your client is going to react, or the uncertainty of how effectively you're going to be able to communicate everything that you want to communicate to the client in a way that will be reassuring. This is an example of how procrastination is a common form of intolerance of uncertainty. Procrastination is a form of intolerance of uncertainty because it's essentially a variant of avoidance. It's putting off or avoiding doing something right now because I'm afraid of a fearful outcome. And in doing so, that gives me some certainty that the negative event isn't happening in this moment. So by putting off making the phone call to my client, I have certainty that the client isn't yelling at me in this moment. And I have certainty that I'm not fumbling and bumbling over my words and having difficulty communicating clearly with the client. I have certainty in this moment at work, even though it's just temporary, and even though I'm still going to have to deal with this situation. And this is one of the interesting features about procrastination, in that it helps a person deal with anxiety or worry in the moment as they avoid doing something that they're anxious about. But at the same time, because the person knows that they're still going to have to deal with the situation at some point soon, that stays in the person's mind and sort of generates a constant buzz and hum of anxiety and worry. So you can probably see the big problems with procrastination. First of all, it's not actually dealing with the problem situation. And therefore, the problem situation may fester and get worse the longer I don't deal with it. Maybe if I tell my client right away what's going on, we can discuss some potential solutions and resolve the problem before it gets bigger. Now, the other problem with procrastination is that it doesn't even do a very good job at fully eliminating my anxiety anyways. Because even if I put off making the phone call to my client, I'm still going to be thinking about it in the back of my mind, and there's still going to be anxiety about it. It's also important to recognize that procrastination, in the context of intolerance of uncertainty, is based on an assumption that whatever it is that I'm procrastinating doing is going to turn out negatively. And so that's why I'm avoiding it. It's based on the assumption that the uncertainty of the situation is going to turn out negatively. But you can probably also recognize that this isn't always the case. Uncertain situations don't always lead to negative outcomes, and people know that. But as is often the case with intolerance of uncertainty, it's not a matter of knowing logically that uncertainty doesn't turn out badly. It's more a problem of a person not behaving as if it's true. And that's what happens when people procrastinate. Now, one question that can come up is, what if I'm not procrastinating? What if I'm putting off something because I just don't want to do it, as opposed to being anxious about a negative outcome? So the key is determining whether or not the procrastination is intolerance of uncertainty. The key to that is to think about the motivation for the procrastination. For example, suppose I am putting off doing laundry because I don't enjoy doing laundry. And I'll just wait until I absolutely have to do laundry because I no longer have any more clean clothes to wear. So while technically I'm procrastinating doing the laundry, this isn't an example of intolerance of uncertainty. There's no uncertainty in this situation. I just don't want to do my laundry because I'm kind of lazy. But imagine a scenario in which I put off doing laundry because I'm concerned that I'm going to shrink some of my clothes, or that a random red sock is going to get into the laundry with my white towels and turn everything pink. In that case, the procrastination is an example of intolerance of uncertainty, because I'm putting off the laundry because I'm fearful of some uncertain and negative outcome. Okay, so you recognize that you're procrastinating, and that the procrastination is an example of you being intolerant of uncertainty. What can you do about it? What can you do about the procrastination? How can you fix this? Well, the first step is to be aware that you're procrastinating, and that the procrastination is due to intolerance of uncertainty, and that you're being anxious and fearful of something bad happening. And the next thing to do is to think about a behavioral experiment that you can do in the situation in which you're procrastinating. And when I talk about behavioral experiments, what I'm talking about is doing something that tests the accuracy of your worry. So for example, in the situation that we talked about earlier, in which you might be procrastinating calling the client with bad news, a behavioral experiment may be to decide to make the phone call to that client at a particular time today. Once you've committed to making the phone call, the next step is to think about what you worry is going to happen in the situation. This is your prediction, and it's important to remember that that's all worry actually is. It's just a prediction. So, what might be some of the worry predictions in this situation? Well, I might worry that the client is going to be so angry that they're going to take their business somewhere else. I worry that I'm going to fumble over my words and I'm going to sound completely incompetent, resulting in the client complaining to my boss about me. Again, these are predictions, and these are what I'm concerned is going to happen when I make that phone call. So I have the experiment, what I'm going to do, and I have my prediction, what my worry tells me is going to happen. So the next step is to now make the phone call and see what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. And this is where I see what happens and generate evidence which I can then compare to what my worry prediction actually was. And that's the last step. Comparing what my worry predicted was going to happen to what actually happened. And what this does is that it gives you a sense of how accurate your worries are at predicting the future. Maybe the client isn't there and I leave a phone message following which the client calls me back and we have a really good discussion about what happened and what the next steps are. It's not nearly as bad as what my worry predicted. In doing these behavioral experiments, if you find that over and over and over and over again, what you predicted doesn't actually happen, then it probably suggests that your worries aren't very good predictors of future events. And in doing this, you can start to begin questioning the benefits of procrastination, which can result in you doing less of it, being more efficient, and addressing problems right away rather than allowing them to fester and become bigger than they actually need to be. So, behavioral experiments targeting procrastination can be powerful in helping manage and overcome this intolerance of uncertainty. The other thing I often encourage people to do is to look for and to take advantage of naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty. And to do this by imagining the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? By having this question at the forefront of your mind, you're likely going to be better at recognizing and identifying times when you're procrastinating. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I ask that woman that I've been noticing at the coffee shop for a few weeks out? Would I ask her out on a date, or would I wait for a better, more perfect opportunity before I ask her out? That sort of thing. And by doing this, you constantly build your tolerance for uncertainty, which can lead to you feeling more confident, proactive, and less anxious, because you see that the world isn't as frightening or as threatening as your worry might lead you to believe. Suppose you wanted to make the most informed decision that you could. For example, suppose you wanted to buy a digital camera. How might you approach the purchase of that digital camera? Well, you'd probably find yourself doing some research on the various different models of cameras and reading up on the reviews on different types of cameras, the pros and cons of each camera, and seeing which camera might be the best one. Seems like a pretty reasonable approach, but like with most things, even reasonable approaches can be taken to an extreme, which can then become problematic. One of the most common manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty is excessive information gathering. So, in the example I gave before, most people would do some research about various camera models. However, for someone who's anxious or for someone who tends to worry a lot, they're likely to do excessive information gathering, reading every review that they can find about the particular model of camera that they're interested in. They may read reviews about every other camera model or historical camera models to see how this particular model has evolved from previous versions. They may go into a camera store and ask the person who works there to provide them with even more information about the camera. They may watch numerous YouTube videos about the particular camera model and all of the pros and cons of it. It's almost like the person is looking for that holy grail piece of information that's going to confirm to them that this is the absolute best camera to buy. The problem is that never happens. And it's rare that there is ever one particular piece of information that absolutely confirms that a decision is the right one. There's always some uncertainty. So you see, excessive information gathering is an example of intolerance of uncertainty because what the person is trying to do is to eliminate uncertainty about the decision that they're trying to make. By gathering more and more information, it's all aimed at reducing the uncertainty that they're going to make the wrong choice. And so it almost becomes self-reinforcing that the person needs to continue seeking out information until they're certain that their decision is the right one, the perfect decision. Now, you might be wondering, what's the big deal about this? So what if a person likes to do lots of research before making a decision? Isn't that just being reasonable or responsible? And I agree, a reasonable amount of information gathering makes sense. But excessive information gathering has a couple of significant problems associated with it. First of all, it makes a person extremely inefficient. If it takes me 50 hours of research to decide on what digital camera to buy, that's an awfully big chunk of my life that I'm investing into making a decision about a camera. If I have to put that much time and effort and information gathering into all of my decisions, it's going to be very difficult for me to make any decisions. The reality is, after doing a certain amount of research, any further research beyond that is diminishing gains, and it's unlikely to alter or change the decision that I'm ultimately going to make. And so all of that information gathering, it's kind of pointless. The other big problem with this information gathering is that the more I look for information, the more I'm likely going to get differing views or opinions, which may just make my decision all the more confused and convoluted. By having so much information and so many different perspectives, it may actually make it more difficult and more confusing and more uncertain about what the right decision is. So if you find that you do a lot of excessive information gathering and you recognize that it's a form of intolerance of uncertainty, what can you do about this? How can you fix this? How can you change this? Well, the first step is to recognize that you're engaging in excessive information gathering. And you're doing this as a way of trying to eliminate uncertainty, to try and guarantee that you're making the perfect decision. And once you're aware of that, the next step is to think about potential behavioral experiments that you can do that involve making decisions without excessive information gathering ahead of time. Now, this doesn't have to be a huge step, but it can be a small shift in behavior in which you plan to make decisions without the excessive information gathering. You want to think about these types of behavioral experiments as tests of the predictive accuracy of your worry. So for example, a behavioral experiment could be something along the lines of going shopping for cake mix and not pulling out my phone and reading the reviews, comparing the different types of cake mixes, or not taking a look at the nutritional value labels on the cake mix boxes to try and determine which is the healthiest or the best cake mix to buy. The experiment is to just go into the store, give myself a maximum of 30 seconds to make a decision on the cake mix, and that's the behavioral experiment. That's what I'm going to do differently. The next step is to think about what I worry is going to happen in that situation. This is essentially my prediction of what will happen when I buy the cake mix. You see, the key is to think about your worries as predictions because it's all they really are. Worries are just predictions. So what might my worry predictions be in this situation? Well, I might worry that the cake mix is going to taste awful, or that I'll bring the cake mix home and my wife will be upset with me because it has too much sugar in it. Or I bring the cake mix home and my kids tell me I should have picked the other cake mix. Those are all the things that I predict are going to happen when I buy this cake mix. So we have the experiment, what I'm going to do. We have my prediction, what my worry tells me is going to happen. And so the next step is to actually go to the store, buy the cake mix, and then see what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. By collecting the data, I now have evidence which I can compare to what my worry prediction actually was. And that's the last step, comparing what actually happened to what I predicted was going to happen. By doing this comparison, it gives you a sense of how accurate your worries are at predicting what's going to happen. If you find over and over and over again that what you predict was going to happen doesn't actually happen, then that suggests that your worries are very poor predictors of the future. So, in the example, if I bring the cake mix home and it's perfectly fine, everybody loves it, what does that tell me about my worry prediction? Well, it tells me that my worry prediction was wrong and that I didn't need to do all that excessive research I was planning on doing about which is the best cake mix to buy. So what this type of behavioral experiment can do is that it can get you to start questioning, how necessary is it to do all of this excessive information gathering? And therefore, it allows you to start making decisions without having to collect lots of information, because you have experience with making decisions without that excessive information gathering. And those decisions turned out just fine. So these types of behavioral experiments related to not engaging in excessive information gathering before making decisions can be really helpful in overcoming intolerance of uncertainty. Now, the other thing you can do is to take advantage of all of the naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty that come up on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, it could be deciding to watch a movie on Netflix without reading the synopsis, or going on Rotten Tomatoes and seeing what the reviews and ratings are before you watch it. Maybe you'll really enjoy the movie. Maybe it will really suck. It doesn't matter. The goal is to try it out and see what happens. Those types of little day-to-day things that you can do to tolerate uncertainty around making decisions without having to do a lot of information gathering before you make the decision, those types of things can be really helpful in building your tolerance for uncertainty. And one of the things I always like to do is to encourage my clients to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain, so that they're filtering the world through this question. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I look up the reviews on 3 different pizza places before ordering pizza, or would I just pick the closest place? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I ask the server what they would recommend on the menu, or would I just pick something that I think I would like? Those types of things, those types of day-to-day activities give you lots of opportunities to engage in these types of small tolerating uncertainty experiments. And in doing so, you're building your tolerance for uncertainty because you no longer have to seek out excessive information to reduce uncertainty around your decisions, but you're just able to make the decisions based on the information that you have at hand. And by doing this, this can result in you feeling a lot more confident, more spontaneous, and less anxious, because you're not constantly seeing mistakes and failure with every potential decision. Nobody likes making mistakes. We typically want to do a good job and do things right. And so, to avoid making mistakes, it's common and natural to double-check work to ensure that everything was done right. So in that sense, double-checking is pretty natural and can demonstrate a level of conscientiousness and care about what you're working on. Therefore, Double checking in and of itself is not a bad thing. However, it does become problematic and it does contribute to worry and anxiety when a person engages in a lot of double checking. Think of it as an example. Suppose you need to send an email to your boss and some other members of your team at work. You want to ensure that everything you're communicating is communicated clearly in the email and that there's little room for misinterpretation. You want to make sure that all of the spelling is correct, all the punctuation is proper, and so you double check that email. But is there anything wrong with double checking the email? Well, the answer is it depends. If the email is extremely important and it's ultra critical that you're communicating clearly and that there are no punctuation or spelling mistakes, then it makes perfect sense to double check that email. But if it's just an email about where you're meeting for drinks after work, then it makes a lot less sense to double check the email. Also, if you triple and quadruple check emails, that also starts to make less sense. And that starts to cross over into anxiety driving behaviors rather than just basic conscientiousness. So the point of this is that there's a point in which double checking things or redoing things because you're no longer certain they were done right in the first place crosses over to become intolerance of uncertainty. When you double or triple or quadruple check things that you typically do automatically, this is designed to eliminate any uncertainty in the situation and to try and make sure that what you're concerned about doesn't happen. So in the email example, by checking over the email again and again and again, it gives me a sense of certainty that nobody's going to misinterpret what I'm saying in the email and that there aren't any grammatical typos or spelling errors that could lead to people thinking that I'm a poor communicator. But would any of those things happen, especially if the email is something that isn't super important? Well, probably not, as most people, when they read an email, aren't really paying attention to the grammar or the spelling or the punctuation. They just want to get the gist of the email. So one thing you might be wondering is, so what if I double check or triple check an email before I send it? What's the big deal? If it makes me feel less anxious and it makes me feel more confident that no one's going to misinterpret what I'm saying, isn't that a good thing? The problem with double checking things like this is that you're sending yourself a subtle message. And that subtle message is that you're not very good at communicating and that you're highly likely to make mistakes, spelling errors, punctuation errors, or that people will misinterpret what you're saying. Because if those things weren't highly likely to happen, why would you have to double and triple check all of your work all of the time? Essentially, your anxiety is following your behavior. If you're behaving like something bad is highly likely to happen, you're going to feel like something bad is highly likely to happen. The double and triple checking things or redoing them also serves to make you a lot less efficient. If every time I'm sending an email, I have to review it over and over and over again for punctuation problems or potential opportunities for something to be misinterpreted, it's going to take me a lot longer to send every email that I need to send. So I'm less efficient and I get less work done. For what purpose? Well, the purpose is to avoid something negative happening. Like something like somebody noticing a typo in an email and criticizing me about it. So if you think about it, what I'm doing is I'm trading being a lot less efficient to avoid an extremely unlikely outcome. And this is very common in the manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty. So, how do you tell the difference between reasonable double-checking behavior versus excessive intolerance of uncertainty double-checking behavior? Well, the answer is there's no simple way of determining this. A large part of it has to do with a realistic and honest evaluation of the situation. If this is a casual email to coworkers about where we're going to go for drinks after work, then it's probably not something I need to be double or triple checking. And if I am double or triple checking it, that's a good indication that I'm being intolerant of uncertainty. Now, if it's a formal report to an important client, then it makes more sense for me to spend some time double checking the document to ensure that things are clear and that there are no typos or careless mistakes in it. So part of the challenge with building tolerance for uncertainty in this situation is that you have to tolerate uncertainty for the difference between what is important double and triple checking versus what is unimportant double and triple checking. And that's not always the case. It's not always easy to determine what's important to double check versus what's not important to double check. So if you relate to this, if you find yourself often double and triple checking things or redoing them because you're no longer certain you did them right, for even small, relatively unimportant tasks, and if you recognize that this is a form of intolerance of uncertainty, what exactly can you do about this? How do you change this? How do you stop this intolerance of uncertainty behavior? Well, you've already done the first thing, and that is to recognize and to distinguish that the double-checking behavior is a form of intolerance of uncertainty, and that it's not just an example of being diligent or conscientious. It goes above and beyond that, and it's being driven by anxiety. Once you recognize that you're engaging in this intolerance of uncertainty, double-checking, or redoing, the key is to focus on behavior change. Essentially, reducing or eliminating the double-checking or redoing behavior. And you can do this by engaging in behavioral experiments that are essentially tests of your worry. So let's use the example of sending off the email and talk about how we would do a behavioral experiment in that situation. What I might decide to do as my behavioral experiment is to send an email to some of my coworkers and intentionally misspell my name at the end of the email. I might do a little typo, maybe mix up a couple of the letters. So that's the behavioral experiment. That's what I'm choosing to do. The next step is to think about what is the worry telling me is going to happen in this situation. And this is essentially my prediction of what's going to happen if I send the email with that typo. And it's important to remember, all worries are essentially just predictions. And so that's what we're looking at here. What is the accuracy of this prediction? So what might my worry prediction be in this situation? Well, my worry might tell me that people are going to notice the typo in my name and somebody's going to comment about it to me, and they're going to comment that I've misspelled my name, questioning how smart I am, telling me that they found my emails sloppy and unprofessional. That's what I predict is going to happen when I send that email with the typo. So now we have the experiment, what I'm going to do, and we have my prediction, what my worry tells me is going to happen. So now the next step is to actually send off that email with the typo and to see what happens. This is the data collection part of this tolerating uncertainty experiment. And this is where I get to see what actually happens in the situation. By collecting the data, I'm gathering evidence which I can now compare with what my worry prediction actually was. And that's the last step, comparing what actually happens to what my worry predicted was going to happen. And this can give me a sense of how accurate or how accurate I am or how accurate my worries are at predicting what's going to happen. Now, in this scenario, chances are I send off the email and no one says anything about it, because even if they notice the typo, they probably would have just assumed it was a typo rather than a sign of my lacking intelligence. So nothing bad actually happens when I send the email. And if you do these types of behavioral experiments and you find over and over and over and over and over again that what you predict was going to happen doesn't actually happen, then it tells you that your worries probably aren't very good predictors of the future. And this can lead you to start questioning how necessary and important it is for you to constantly double and triple check things to ensure that no mistakes are ever made. And as a result, this allows you to be more efficient, less self-conscious, and more confident in your abilities because you're not always checking to see if you've made a mistake. So these behavioral experiments around not engaging and double checking, this can be very powerful to help you overcome intolerance of uncertainty. The other thing you can do to take advantage is to take advantage of naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty that come up on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, if I'm pretty sure that my appointment was at 1 o'clock, but there's a small part of me that thinks that the appointment might be at 2 o'clock, rather than double checking the time of the appointment, I can just decide to show up at 1 o'clock. Worst case scenario, I arrive an hour early. But the exercise reminds me that I don't have to double check everything, and that I can sometimes just rely on my judgment. To help my clients remember to be doing this regularly, I encourage them to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? And what you'll find by filtering your world through this question is that you'll see lots of opportunities to tolerate uncertainty and not engage in double checking or redoing behaviors. Now, in a prior video, I talked about the manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty, which is associated with excessive information gathering before making a decision. I use the example of doing lots and lots of research and reading tons of reviews before making a decision to buy a digital camera. Now, suppose you went through that process. You did your research and you decided on the digital camera that you wanted to buy. You buy the camera, and at first, you feel pretty happy with your decision. But have you ever been in a situation like this where you start to question whether or not you made the right decision? Did you actually buy the right camera, or was there a better camera that you could have bought? This second guessing is an example of intolerance of uncertainty, in that the whole purpose of reviewing your decision and questioning whether or not you made the right decision, it's all aimed at gaining certainty about whether you made the right decision or not. So when you're questioning a decision that you've already made, what you're doing is essentially relitigating the decision and thinking about the information that you had going into making the decision and reviewing it over and over again. But what can also happen in the second guessing process is that you begin to start seeking out new information to help you determine whether or not the decision that you've already made to buy that digital camera was the right decision. This can take on the form of researching new cameras that have come out since you bought your digital camera and reading reviews on all of those newer cameras. It could be reading long-term reviews of the camera that you bought to see if other people have found the camera to still perform well after a while. All of these behaviors are designed to eliminate the uncertainty around your decision and to try and answer the question, did I make the right decision about which camera I bought? Yes or no? Now, you might be wondering, look, so what? So what if I second guess myself? So what if I want some clarity or clarification as to whether or not I made the right decision? Isn't that a good thing? Well, in the context of someone who's worrying excessively, the second guessing doesn't really serve any positive benefits. First of all, it makes a person really inefficient. They've already spent a whole bunch of time researching and gathering information before finally making the decision to buy the camera. And by engaging in second guessing, they're spending a whole bunch more time reviewing that information again or reviewing new information to confirm the decision that's already been made. Questioning a decision you've already made also tends to undermine your confidence. Ask yourself this question. If you were confident in your decision making, if you were confident that you make good and reasonable decisions, would you have to constantly review your decisions to determine whether or not they were good decisions? People who are confident make decisions and then move forward with their decisions. And if the decision turns out to be a mistake, then they deal with the mistake then. They don't assume that they have potentially made a poor decision and review it to confirm whether or not it actually was a poor decision. Therefore, by engaging in this second guessing and questioning the decision, what you're doing is actually undermining your confidence. You're telling yourself that you're not good at making decisions. So, if you can relate to this, if you find yourself often questioning decisions you've already made and you recognize that this is a form of intolerance of uncertainty that you regularly engage in, what can you do about this? How do you go about changing this? Well, the first thing is to recognize that you're second guessing and to recognize that this is a form of intolerance of uncertainty. It's not you being responsible and diligent and reviewing a decision to make sure it's the right decision. It's you undermining yourself because you're not sure you made the right decision. And once you recognize that you're engaging in second-guessing behavior or questioning a decision you've already made, the key is to change your behavior. What this means is that you stop doing the things that you're doing to second-guess yourself. So what that might mean is when you catch yourself reading reviews about new digital cameras that have come out since you bought your camera, ask yourself, why am I doing this? If you're doing it because you're just really interested in digital cameras, then by all means, go ahead, read those reviews, enjoy it. However, if you're doing this because you're trying to see if there's a better camera that's come out since you bought your camera, this is when you need to disengage from that behavior. Maybe you need to give yourself, for example, a 6-month moratorium from looking at reviews of digital cameras so you don't fall into that trap. Essentially, you want to engage in behaviors that demonstrate an openness to the uncertainty regarding whether or not you made the right decision. It's an acceptance that you've already made the decision. You bought the digital camera based on your best evaluation of the information that you had at the time, and you're not going to review it any further. So, in this way, challenging this form of manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is really about eliminating intolerance of uncertainty behaviors that you might engage in after the fact. It's essentially eliminating information gathering to determine whether or not you made the best decision and just tolerating the uncertainty that maybe you didn't make the best decision. Maybe you made a decision that was wrong, but you made the decision, and this is the digital camera that you have. In doing so, it can also help foster a sense of contentment, that not everything you do, and that not every decision you have to make has to be confirmed as the absolute perfect decision. And so by doing this, you're building tolerance for uncertainty because you no longer have to seek confirmation about the effectiveness of your decision making. And this could result in you feeling more confident, more content, and less anxious because you're not constantly seeking out examples of potential mistakes that you might have made. I'll be honest with you, I tend to be a very optimistic person. I tend to view the world in a generally positive way. And I tend to think that things generally work out the way they're supposed to. Now, this isn't always the case. I acknowledge that bad things can happen. But I also see lots of opportunity for positive and hopeful things in the world. So, I don't think of optimism as a bad thing. And most people wouldn't consider optimism as an example of intolerance of uncertainty. But it can be. And there are ways in which people can use optimism to try and eliminate the uncertainty in their lives, even though it's not actually true. I've done a number of videos on the concept of intolerance of uncertainty and how intolerance of uncertainty tends to drive excessive, difficult to control worry. And as a review, intolerance of uncertainty causes a person to focus on all of the potential negative outcomes in a situation, and therefore makes the person feel much more anxious and worried about what might happen. So, how do optimism and intolerance of uncertainty relate to one another? Well, sometimes when faced with an uncertain situation or an uncertain life event, people who worry a lot can become extremely anxious and cope with that anxiety by reassuring themselves with exaggerated optimism. So, for example, suppose I go in for a medical checkup and my doctor notices a concerning mole on my arm. My doctor is concerned enough that he wants me to see a dermatologist to get this checked out. Now, obviously, this would be understandably alarming for a lot of people. I might start to worry about what this means. Is this something serious? What if this is cancer? What if it's spread? What if I'm going to get seriously sick? What if I'm going to die? It's easy to think about the what if questions and how the what if questions can spiral down the rabbit hole based on the uncertainty of what this mole means. Now, this is where exaggerated optimism can come in as a form of intolerance of uncertainty. In this situation, I'm feeling really anxious and worried because I don't know what the mole represents. But rather than accepting the uncertainty of the situation and having a wait-and-see approach, the intolerance of uncertainty fuels me to want to come up with a certain explanation or a certain solution to what's going on in this situation. And so what can sometimes happen is that people view a situation like this with exaggerated and unrealistic optimism. It's going to be fine. It's nothing serious. It's no big deal. My doctor is just being overly alarmist. Essentially, what I'm doing is creating a sense of certainty by telling myself there's nothing wrong here, that there's no problems, that the mole isn't cancerous, and that the rational explanation for what's going on here is that my doctor is just a bit of a hypochondriac. And in doing so, I eliminate, at least in my head, any uncertainty in the situation. I don't have anything to worry about because I've told myself that everything is perfectly fine. Now, you might be wondering, if this type of approach works, if I can just tell myself that everything is fine and it will help take away my anxiety, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is, you know that you're approaching the situation with exaggerated optimism. In the example we're talking about, the only basis I have for saying that everything is fine is just me saying that everything is fine. I know there's no evidence to support this, and that this is just me telling myself it's going to be fine and that there's nothing wrong. So, even though the exaggerated optimism is designed to give me a sense of certainty, albeit false certainty in the situation, I know that it's a false certainty, and therefore I know the situation still could be bad. Ironically, the fact that I'm telling myself that everything is perfectly fine is almost like a signal to me that everything isn't perfectly fine. If everything was perfectly fine, then I know that I wouldn't have to be creating this exaggerated optimistic world in which I have imaginal certainty that the mole isn't cancerous. It's almost like when a child's going in for an immunization shot and the parent, with all good intentions, repeatedly tells the child, everything's going to be okay, there's nothing to worry about, it won't be bad, it won't hurt. Saying those types of things actually makes the child more anxious and more fearful of what's going to happen. Because if it wasn't that big of a deal, their parent wouldn't be making such a big deal about telling them that it's not a big deal. And so that's similar to how this exaggerated optimism actually fuels worry and anxiety. Because the person who's engaging in the exaggerated optimism, they know rationally that there's a limited basis for it. No matter how much I tell myself that the mole isn't a big deal and that I'm certain there's nothing wrong, I know that's not true. I don't know that there's nothing wrong. And so that leads us to question, how exactly should we deal with this exaggerated optimism manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty? And you do it by allowing yourself to be optimistic, but also to be honest and accurate with yourself about what you're actually telling yourself. So rather than telling myself, everything's fine, I'm 100% certain it's not cancerous, my doctor's just being a hypochondriac, it's much more effective for me to say something like, I'm hopeful it's not cancerous. I don't have a history of cancer in my family, and my doctor's always been quite thorough and diligent. But the mole is still concerning, and it's important to get it checked out. This is a much more realistic and honest way of thinking about the situation, and doing so in a way that doesn't exacerbate or magnify the amount of worry or anxiety I might be feeling in a situation like that. So the goal here isn't to tell yourself that you're certain everything is going to be okay, but the goal is more to tell yourself that you're hopeful everything is going to be okay, and that you just have to wait and see for whatever the test results are going to bring, and then to deal with it then. The thing is, human beings tend to be social creatures. We like to be around other people. And part of that is the ability to seek the input and advice from others. Social support is a huge protective factor in coping with anxiety and depression conditions. So it's very common for people to seek reassurance and to seek advice from others to help validate how they're feeling or what they're thinking. However, excessive reassurance seeking can become very problematic, particularly in people who tend to worry excessively. For someone who's anxious and tends to worry a lot, they're likely to engage in a lot of reassurance seeking, seeking input from other people about important or even unimportant decisions in their life. This reassurance seeking can take the form of, for example, repeatedly asking your boss how you're performing at work and if your boss is satisfied with the job that you're doing. It can take the form of talking to a friend about an argument that you had with another friend to seek reassurance that you didn't do anything wrong. The reassurance seeking can also take more subtle forms. Suppose I have an argument with my wife, and I'm not sure if she's still angry at me. And I might want to seek some reassurance that we're good, and I do this by dropping a little, "I love you," to see how she responds. If she tells me that she loves me back, then I have some reassurance that we're all good. This reassurance-seeking behavior is sort of a form of information gathering to try and make uncertain situations more certain. It's designed to eliminate uncertainty in vague or ambiguous situations. In the example of me seeking reassurance about my job performance from my boss, it may be that I'm not sure how I'm doing at work. And so if my boss tells me that they're happy with my performance, it gives me certainty that things are going okay with work. If I'm not sure I was overly harsh or inappropriate with my friend, seeking advice or reassurance from another friend can help give me some certainty about how I behave towards my friend or how they might be feeling. This reassurance seeking is aimed at confirming that what I'm concerned about isn't actually happening. It's aimed at eliminating any ambiguity or uncertainty in a situation by getting someone else's input on that situation. So, reassurance seeking is just a form of intolerance of uncertainty. But you might be wondering, look, what's so bad about seeking reassurance? Why is it so bad to ask someone else's advice, especially if it can help relieve some of my anxiety about a particular situation? The main problem with reassurance seeking is that it undermines your confidence in yourself. It makes you feel like your judgment isn't accurate. And so you need someone else's judgment to confirm what's going on in the situation. Think about it. Think of the most confident people that you know. Are these people who are constantly seeking reassurance from others? Are these people constantly asking other people, what would you have done in that situation? Are these confident people the people who are checking in with their partner to make sure that their partner still cares about them? Probably not. Confident people don't engage in excessive reassurance seeking. People who believe in themselves don't constantly have to seek affirmation or confirmation from other people. This reassurance seeking is also a lot less efficient. If I have to check in with my boss about every task I have to do at work to get reassurance that I'm doing every task the right way, that's going to make me a lot slower in getting my work done. And this is probably unnecessary if I'm actually qualified and competent in doing my job. So this isn't to say that you should never seek reassurance or never seek the input of other people. However, it's important to recognize that this is all a matter of how often you're needing to seek the reassurance and the nature of the reassurance you're seeking. If you're constantly having to check in with your boss and just have them confirm that what you're doing is the right thing, that's probably excessive reassurance seeking. And it's a good sign that that's probably a form of intolerance of uncertainty. Whereas, if your motivation for checking in with your boss about how to do something is because you genuinely don't know how to do it, that's not a form of intolerance of uncertainty. That's a reasonable seeking of input from someone who knows more about a topic than you do. So if you find yourself doing a lot of reassurance seeking and you recognize that it's a form of intolerance of uncertainty, the question becomes, what can you do about it? Well, the first step is what we just talked about, which is recognizing when you're engaging in reassurance seeking as a form of intolerance of uncertainty versus the reasonable seeking out of input and advice from other people. Once you recognize that you're engaging in excessive reassurance seeking, the next step is to think about behavioral experiments that you can do that involve reducing or eliminating the amount of reassurance seeking that you're actually engaging in. Now, this doesn't have to be a huge step, but it can be smaller, subtle changes in behavior in which you do something without then seeking reassurance from someone else afterwards. When I talk about behavioral experiments to build tolerance for uncertainty, essentially what I'm talking about is testing the accuracy of your worry. So for example, a behavioral experiment could be something along the lines of me cooking a meal that I've never prepared before without seeking input, advice, or reassurance from my wife before I cook the meal. The experiment is to just go by the recipe, make the meal myself, and see how it turns out. That's the behavioral experiment. The next step is to think about what I worry is going to happen in that situation. This is my prediction of what I'm worried will happen if I make the meal that I've never made before. So the idea here is to reconceptualize or to think about your worries as predictions, because really that's all worry is. It's just a prediction. So in this situation, my worry prediction may be something like, I'm totally going to screw up dinner and burn everything, and my wife is going to be really disappointed in me. Or I'm going to make a meal that ends up tasting awful, and that my wife is going to be upset with me because if I had talked to her about it ahead of time, she would have told me that's a terrible recipe. I may end up making a meal that seems to turn out well, but my wife hates it because it's got pineapple in it, and I didn't know that she hates pineapple, but I would have known that if I had run the recipe past her first. These are my worry predictions of what's going to happen if I cook this meal. So we have the experiment, we have my prediction, and so the next step is to actually make the meal and see what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. By collecting the data, I have evidence that I can now compare to my worry prediction. And that's the final step, comparing what actually happened when I made the meal to my prediction of what I thought was going to happen when I made the meal. Maybe what I find is that my wife really enjoyed the meal and is so happy that I stepped out and tried something different without asking her about it first. And the thing is, if you find over and over and over again that what your worry predicts is going to happen never actually happens, then that probably suggests that your worries are pretty terrible predictors of the future. By doing these types of behavioral experiments, you can begin to question how necessary it is to seek reassurance from other people before making decisions, or to seek their reassurance to confirm what you did in a particular situation. And as a result, it helps build your confidence because you're trusting your own judgment rather than having other people confirm your judgment for you. The other thing that you can do on a day-to-day basis, on sort of everyday basis, is to take advantage of naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty. To do this, what I encourage people to do is to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. So they have to filter their world through this question. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? And so I like them to think about this question, to help process their world through the question as a filter and a guide for their behavior. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I ask my teacher that clarifying question even though I'm 95% sure I understand it? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I ask multiple friends what they thought of my presentation at that workshop? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I ask my wife repeatedly if she's upset at me about something? These types of things give you opportunities to engage in small tolerating uncertainty experiments on a day-to-day basis in which you're not engaging in reassurance-seeking behavior. And in doing so, these little day-to-day experiments help build your tolerance for uncertainty. I'm sure you've heard of the concept of helicopter parent. The parent that's always hovering around their child, wanting to make sure that everything is okay, ensuring that their child never gets hurt, that their child's social functioning is intact, and that everything is going well in their child's life. Those all seem like noble and admirable goals, don't they? But the term helicopter parent has become somewhat critical of parents who overprotect their children, constantly hovering around them and constantly doing things for them. It's almost become kind of a derogatory term for parents who are doing too much for their children. One of the big challenges with loving and caring about another person is that you want everything to turn out well for that person. You don't want to see a loved one in pain or hurting. And so it seems quite noble and good to want to step in and help and protect them the best that you can. This is commonly seen in parents who often want the best for their children and want to protect their children from bad things happening. It's typically why you haven't heard the term helicopter older brother. But why do we do this? Why do we feel a need to take on the responsibility and care of another person, overprotecting them and doing things for them? Well, caring about people is fraught with uncertainty. It's hard to know exactly what's going on in a child's life, in your partner's life, with your best friend. And if you're uncertain that something bad could happen to them, you may feel a need or desire to want to prevent bad things from occurring. So you want to intervene to stop that. You see, this desire to want to overprotect other people or to do things for them is a variant of a prior manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty that I talked about, which is having to do everything yourself, not delegating tasks to other people. Except in the situation where you're overprotecting others or doing things for them, the tasks that you're not delegating, those tasks are the ones that would be to allow the other person to take care of themselves. So really, one way of thinking about overprotecting others or doing things for them is that it's a form of control. If you're able to do things for people you care about, then you have a sense of certainty that they're going to be okay because you've taken care of them. The moment you allow them to do things on their own, you allow them to take care of themselves, now it creates a lot of uncertainty in the situation. What if this person doesn't make the right decisions? What if they don't know enough and get themselves into a problematic situation? What if they mess this up and this aspect of their life and it has long-term consequences for them? You know what? It's easier and better if I just take care of it myself so that they'll be okay. You see, this need for control and making sure that other people you care about are okay is a common form of intolerance of uncertainty. By having some control in the situation, we have a sense that we can control the outcome, and we can make the outcome be what we want it to be. So if I want to make sure that my child gets a really great mark on their science fair project, the way that I can ensure this will happen is by doing the project for them or helping them a lot with the project. The moment I relinquish control and allow my child to do their science fair project on their own, this can trigger a lot of anxiety and worry because I don't have any say or control over the outcome. What if they procrastinate working on the project and it ends up the night before and they haven't done anything, so I have to stay up all night helping them on it? What if they make some massive errors in the science project and they get a failing mark because they messed up something that I could have helped them with? What if every other child's parent is helping out their children with their science projects, but if I don't, my child is going to stand out as having a far inferior project compared to everyone else's? So if this is the case, you might be asking, what's the harm in this? What's the harm in overprotecting people? What's so bad about helping them out and doing things for them, making sure that they're okay? Well, one of the major problems with this is that it takes up your time to be doing those things that the other person should be doing for themselves. By having to take on responsibility for doing things for your loved one, it means that you're doing additional work, therefore making you less efficient at completing the things that you need to be doing for you. The other big problem with overprotecting others or doing things for them is that you never allow the other person to develop a sense of competence or mastery in what they're doing. This is one of the big critiques of helicopter parenting. If I'm always protecting my child and doing things for them, then they'll never learn or develop a sense of confidence that they can do things by themselves, that they can do things without me having to do everything for them. Because at some point, the loved one, the person you care about, the person that you're overprotecting and doing things for, they're going to be in a situation without you to help them out. And what's going to happen in that situation? Will they have the experience to trust that they can solve the problem? Do they have the experience that they're going to effectively navigate the situation? Well, probably not. So overprotecting others or doing things for them ends up with you feeling exhausted because you're having to do so much for the other person. But at the same time, it also harms the person that you're overprotecting because they never get a chance to learn that they can do these things on their own. This is also based on the assumption that if I'm not in control, and that if I can't protect the person or do things for them, then something bad is going to happen. They're going to be irreparably hurt or harmed, and they're going to suffer because of it. Now, at a logical level, you probably know that isn't true. But as is typical the case with intolerance of uncertainty, it's not a matter of logically knowing that uncertainty doesn't always turn out negatively. It's more a problem of the person not behaving as if that's true. So, if you find yourself overprotecting others or doing things for them, what can you do about this? How can you fix this? How can you build your tolerance for uncertainty around this? Well, the first step is to recognize that this is an example of intolerance of uncertainty behavior. Recognizing that you're overprotecting others, doing things for them, and understanding that the motivation behind this is to try and eliminate uncertainty to make sure that everything is okay for your loved one, and in doing so, try to feel better yourself. Now, once you've recognized that this is intolerance of uncertainty, the idea is to think about a behavioral experiment or behavioral experiments that you can do that involve allowing the other person to take care of themselves and let go of some of the control that you've taken on as part of their life. Now, this doesn't have to be a huge, grand gesture, but it can be a small shift in behavior in which you delegate smaller tasks to the other person and see what happens. You can think about these behavioral experiments as ways of testing and evaluating the accuracy of your worry. So, for example, if I always lay out the clothes for my 10-year-old child to wear for school the next day, my behavioral experiments could be something like telling her to pick out her clothes for school the next day. Once I've done that, the next step is to think about, what do I worry is going to happen in this situation? And this is my prediction of what's going to happen when I ask my daughter to pick out her own clothes. And so it's important to think about your worries as predictions, because that's all they really are. So imagine the scenario. What might my worry predictions be in this situation? Well, I might worry that she won't do it the night before, and in the morning this is going to lead to a mad scramble to try to get everybody ready and out of the house to school on time. I might worry that she'll pick something that looks ridiculous and that the kids at school will make fun of her. I might worry that she'll pick out clothes that are dirty or stained and that the teachers might think negatively of me for not being able to supply my daughter with clean clothes. Those are my predictions of what's going to happen when I ask my 10-year-old to pick out her own clothes to go to school the next day. So we have our experiment, what I'm going to do, and we have my prediction, which is what my worry tells me is going to happen. The next step is to then engage in the behavior, asking my daughter to pick out her clothes for the next day, and then seeing what happens. This is the data collection step in the tolerating uncertainty experiment. By seeing what happens and collecting the data, I now have evidence which I can now compare to what my worry prediction was. And that's the final step, comparing what I predicted was going to happen with what actually did happen. And what this does is it gives you a sense of how accurate your worries are at predicting what's going to happen in the future. And if you're finding over and over and over and over again that what you predict was going to happen never actually happens, and what this suggests is that you're kind of terrible, or your worries are kind of terrible at predicting the future. And what this can do is to get you to start questioning how necessary it is for you to have to overprotect people in your life and to constantly do things for them. And as a result, you may be more willing to delegate tasks for them to do for themselves, letting them take on greater responsibility for their lives. And in doing so, you can be a lot more efficient in your activities because you have more time to do things for you. So these behavioral experiments around not overprotecting people you care about can be very useful and powerful in helping you overcome intolerance of uncertainty. The other thing you can do is to take advantage of all of the naturally occurring opportunities to tolerate uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. And one of the ways you can do this is by imagining the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of your brain. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, What would I do in this situation? By having that question at the forefront of your mind, you're likely going to be better at recognizing and identifying the times that you're doing things for other people or trying to overprotect them. And by doing this, you're constantly building your own tolerance for uncertainty, which can lead you to feeling less worried and less anxious about your loved ones and more confident in their ability to take care of themselves, because you're constantly thinking about, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? Well, I would let the person take care of themselves. And I'd let them take care of themselves, and I see that they can take care of themselves. And what that does is it really chips away at my worry and my fear for them. So there you have it. The ultimate guide for understanding, recognizing, and overcoming intolerance of uncertainty. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. I would love to hear any questions or comments that you have. So please leave me some comments in the comments section down below. If you've been enjoying my videos and would like to see more, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and you'll be alerted every week when I post a new video. So that's it for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, especially this extra long video. And so thank you for that, and I will see you in the next one.